Well, we are talking about banning and banishment in light of the 35th anniversary of the October 19th, 1977 banning and banishment. Black Wednesday is what it's called. And how is it that it affects you as a young person today? Does it, in fact, affect you as a young person today? Or is it an issue of the past, completely forgotten, and now we need to move on? Give me your thoughts about that. Give me a ring, 011 772 0992. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more with our panelists. Stay with us. And welcome back. This evening, you are joining us for the second FrankTalk Radio Dialogue. We are broadcasting live from the YFM studios, continuing with our panelists. If you just joined us, the topic for this evening is banning and banishment. We have just spoken before the break. We're talking to Mr. Kenny Rachidi, speaking to us about contemporary banishment. And of course, Dr. Saleem, this is where I actually extend the conversation to you as well. When we're looking at banishment in the contemporary term, sometimes we so frivolously use the terms. We say, this is a form of banning and banishment, and this constitutes as Black Tuesday, and this is under Black Wednesday, etc. And in fact, before we even, during the break, we were just speaking about how we actually as a nation need to be careful in how we sort of use these terms so frivolously, because we do not understand the impact of it and to the extent that lives were affected by this entire situation. Can you kindly elaborate for us on that?
Yeah, I think we must be very careful in contemporary South Africa to use words loosely and lightly. Words like banning and banishment, because you may do a terrible injustice and violence to the history of struggle and suffering in this country. There are people in this audience, there are people listening at home who were banned. There are two people alive today out of the 160 who were banished. And therefore, while we must be vigilant about restrictions on our freedom of expression and the freedom of media and so on, we must perhaps use other words to describe those potential restrictions or concerns. When people were banned, as Mr. Rachidi has said, they were banned for periods of 5 years. They were, in some cases, restricted to their homes between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. They were restricted to their homes between 6 p.m. on Friday till 6 a.m. on Monday. They were required to report regularly to the police station. They could not have more than 1 or 2 people present at any point in time. That was banning. When people were banished, they were taken away from their homes and they were sent 1,500 kilometers away for an unlimited period. Some of them didn't come back. They lived under the harshest conditions possible. As I argue in the book, I would have preferred to be on Robben Island than to be banished. Because at least on Robben Island, you may have been fed, and you may have had health care, and you were amongst many comrades. Banished people led a terrible existence. So, in order not to do an injustice to those people and the suffering they went through, I think we must be very careful to use too lightly and loosely words like banning and banishment today, because of the dangers of not recognizing the hardships and the injustices of the past. I would prefer we use other terms.
But do you feel, and in fact I'm going to pose this to our audience who is here, do feel free to engage with us throughout, in fact, this entire conversation. Quite as you would say that, we use this term banning and banishment where we do not understand the extent and the effects of it. But I believe that here we are sitting in a room with young people who may not, in fact, Dr. Saleem, understand the extent and may even use the term quite frivolously. If you remember, when the case came out as of last November about an investigative journalist, in fact, Ntsiki wa Africa, and his case came out. He was arrested in August 2010 on alleged charges of fraud and defeating the ends of justice. Everybody came out, and even media entities came out to say, listen, this is a form of Black Tuesday and you're infringing on our freedom of expression, etc. And young people jumped on that bandwagon without, as you would say, understanding the extent. But do you believe that young people have been educated enough to understand the difference between banning and banishment and something that which completely plays, or using a different term, maybe sort of undermining the freedom of expression of individuals, and one such being the investigative journalist Ntsiki wa Africa? And I'm actually going to pose this one to you as well as an audience. Do you feel that as a young person that word, you've got a right to use it in society? Or do you feel that, what happened to Mzilikazi wa Africa in August 2010 was just, it could be used as a different term. There's no contemporary banishment or banning, and therefore we just need to move on. So, if you have a question, we've got a roaming microphone, and we'll be sure to answer those questions. And if you are at home and you're listening to us on your radio, do feel free to give us a call on 011 772 0992. Ms. Sulu, let us look a little bit at the new development of new media in the ICT, in the form of ICT, such as the internet, smartphones, and other multimedia platforms, which have also become an important point in exploring when discussing this issue, this notion of freedom of expression. What impact has this had on the spreading of alternative views in society?
Look, I think overall it's had a good impact. I think a few other people have gotten themselves into a lot of hot water trying to use the social media to express their views. It's when we cross the line and become very offensive, and we humiliate other people, and we actually infringe on their rights, that it becomes quite problematic. And at that point, we do actually need the very education that the other panelists have been talking about, so that we must be informed. But because these are such emotive issues, we really actually need to also take that into account, that there are people who are still actually working through the psychological effects, the emotional effects, and really, some of us, our children will be fourth generation. We tell them the same stories. To be banned and then for Gogo to be under house arrest for 10 years and then to be petrol bombed while in the house, not able to leave. You share those stories because you actually don't want them to be lost. So everybody does get affected. So if you abuse social media and one doesn't take the time to be thoughtful about it, thorough about it, before actually just writing something out. And of course we have to be a lot more sensitive towards each other, and that there is actually another person on the other end who's going to be receiving that message.
Now, Mr. Rachidi, when it comes to you, because looking at life, as when you've been banned, etc., and banishment, experiencing it in life there. But before we do that, we do have a question from our audience. Can you kindly state your name, your surname, as well as your question?
Okay, my name is Nao Mubita. I don't actually have a question. I actually have a statement about the perceptions or the issues that youth have about banning and banishment. I think that in South Africa we have a tendency to downplay the fact that most things that come from apartheid have been watered down in a sense, and they've been disguised as different things. I'll give you an example of what I'm trying to say. As a young black person, a black man for an example, even though you don't have the threat of being banned and banished, you still have the threat of policemen who walk around in the streets and look at you as a suspect and put you in positions where if you have an opinion, you are in trouble. It doesn't only happen to young black men who are walking in the street, but young women, young black men who have opinions in other forums. If you have an opinion that's contrary to what someone in power has, then you fall into those fields where you might feel like you're being banned or banished. Although I'm not trying to downplay the experiences that people had who had those actual experiences. I just think that it's important for us to recognize that there's other ways in which you can feel like you're being ostracized by your society for having an opinion, or that you are being undermined for simply having a different way of thinking.
Dr. Saleem, when we're looking at, as our audience member was saying there, that even though we do not mean to downplay, but there are certain views that are expressed and that leave us feeling alienated from society. One case that I've just mentioned of Mzilikazi wa Africa, who was arrested, and then there was this huge uproar when, there was alleging that it was politically motivated, because of what happened with former Police Commissioner Biko. Now, given that, with that feeling of alienation, because it happened to that journalist, he was alienated, he was taken for questioning, and various sort of information sources coming out to say this does not look so safe. It looks like it was politically motivated. What terms then can we use in this modern day? I mean, if you cannot use banning and banishment because we're simply not giving the actual experience its respect, what do we call that now?
I think the young woman's giving us examples that we must take very seriously, as well as the Wa Africa example. Absolutely, I think we must be very vigilant in our society around these kinds of things that may smack off, in some cases, the kinds of things that happened under apartheid. And that's not being dramatic. And at the same time, let's take the War Africa case. I think we must criticize any unwarranted questioning and restriction of people for political reasons. But at the same time, remember, detention was a very different kind of thing to what War Africa went under. There are people sitting here, and there are people sitting here who went through detention. I was detained for 3 times under the Terrorism Act, the emergency regulations. There are other colleagues sitting in this audience who were also detained. Some of our human rights were violated during those detentions. Some people never came out of detentions, like Neil Agate, Luxmat Ngundle, and so on. So again, I think in order not to do injustice and a violation to the people and the sufferings that they went through things like detention, banning, and so on, I think without denying that we perhaps have to imaginatively find terms now that may give us a sense of what may be happening today and how there may be forms of banishment or banning or restriction. Perhaps we have to innovate those terms to bring home the problems. I have no doubt that democracy still has to be consolidated in this country and deepened in this country. And I have no doubt that what happened in the past could happen again, which is extremely, and that's why it's extremely important for us to be vigilant. But I would just make the plea that I think we must come up with terms that are appropriate to capturing the realities that we experience today, and not quickly and in a knee-jerk way simply call them banning, banishment, and detention, and so on.
We have another question in the audience or a comment. Kindly state your name, your surname, as well as your question. Straight to the point. Unfortunately, we are running out of time.
Hello, my name is Jenny Stwebu, and just in line with what the other lady was saying and what Dr. Saleem was saying, would it not be accurate to say that the banishment in 2012 would be for young people, that we have a very staunch shortage of information, that the banishment is not in terms of information rather than where you're allowed to go, because we have a surplus of information, we have freedom that abounds, and we basically just don't know what the right things to do are and where we can go and who is doing wrong. In terms of, for example, government, they're just going wild with things that we should be seeing as our inheritance, but we don't know much better.
Mr. Rachidi, would you like to answer that question?
In a way, yes. I sort of want to move from the basis of what Mr.
Could you kindly use the microphone, please? I'm with you now.
I want to move from the basis of what my colleague here is actually saying, that during that time, there was actually a law which was saying you could be banned and this will happen to you, 1, 2, 3, 4, that mentioning all those things that are going to restrict you. But I think today we don't really have that kind of a thing. You may do something that maybe the authorities don't feel that they are happy with, and maybe then they immediately try to look for something to make sure that they try to punish you. But I think it is very much different from what we experience. That's actually the way I feel in terms of this approach.
I've got another question from the gentleman with the grey blazer in the front. Can we kindly hand over the mic to him? Right there in the front with the black tie.
Thank you.
Yes, your name is...
My name is Bongane Mkiza from the Freedom Park, the hub of freedom, humanity, reconciliation, and social cohesion. I'm maybe to share this evening with my friend Dr. Badat, because his epic, The Forgotten People, was historically launched at the Freedom Park just recently. I'm actually going to ask you to put your question on ice because we do have to go for a break, so you need to put more time to elaborate and to deliberate on your message. We're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to come straight to you with your question and your comment. Stay with us. We're still talking about banning and banishment. We are here at the YFM studios talking during the course of the second FrankTalk Radio Dialogue. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly after this.